One of the ways we become better artists is by looking at the artworks of other artists and analyzing what they've done well. That way we can take what they've done well and apply it to our own drawings and paintings. And in this video, we're going to take a look at one of Van Gogh's artworks, and we're going to see what we can take away from his art that we can apply to our own drawings and paintings. Hello there everyone, Matt here with thevirtualinstructor.com, and in this video we're going to take a look at one of Van Gogh's most famous paintings, Café Terrace at Night, and we're going to analyze it. We're basically going to critique it, and we're going to see what we can take away from this painting that we can apply to our own drawings and paintings so we're more successful as artists. But before we get into this critique, I'd like to remind you, if you're new to the channel or if you haven't done so yet, make sure you subscribe to the channel and click on the notification bell so you're notified when we upload new videos like this one. And we have a membership program over at thevirtualinstructor.com. So if you want to take your drawing and painting skills to another level, you should check that out. It includes a broad variety of drawing and painting courses on a variety of drawing and painting media and subject matter, weekly critiques as part of the Members Minute, weekly live lessons, which are broadcast each week, of course, and a year-long curriculum for visual arts teachers. You can click on the link in the description below if you want to learn more about our program. And if you want to just get your feet wet and dabble a little bit, you can do that as well. And you can check out 3 of our course videos and ebooks for free. Again, there's a link in the description below. Now, let's get into this critique and take a look at one of Van Gogh's most famous artworks. So here's a look at the painting that we're going to be taking a look at in this critique. Obviously, it was painted by Vincent van Gogh, and I'm willing to bet that you've seen it before. It's most commonly referred to as Café Terrace at Night, although it's gone by other names in the past. This painting was painted on location around September 1888, and it's an oil on canvas. Now, this painting isn't large, and it's not particularly small either. This painting measures 81 centimeters tall by 65.5 centimeters wide. That's approximately 32 inches tall by 26 inches wide. Now, of course, scholars have studied this painting along with other Van Gogh paintings throughout time, and some scholars believe that there are some religious undertones in this particular painting. Some people believe that there are references to the Last Supper as we see these figures eating on the terrace, and they are arranged in a way that's similar to the Last Supper. There's also a nefarious-looking dark figure there in the opening, and some people believe that that's a reference to Judas Iscariot. There's also a repetition of brushstrokes that may resemble crosses throughout the painting. Now, of course, this isn't entirely unheard of because Vincent van Gogh, of course, did have a desire to maybe pursue religious studies or be a preacher earlier on in his life. Now, obviously, one of the most important aspects of creating a strong drawing or painting is in the composition. A strong composition, of course, is naturally going to lead to a stronger drawing or painting, and this composition is particularly strong. So we're going to take a look at some of the aspects that make this composition strong. Now, obviously, one of the ways that you can ensure that you have a strong composition in your own artworks is to make preliminary sketches. And Van Gogh, of course, also made preliminary sketches. And believe it or not, here is a preliminary sketch Van Gogh created in preparation for this particular painting. You can see that it looks like maybe some ink was used to create this drawing. It's very loose, it's very sketchy. There's variety in the line quality. It's an interesting drawing, of course, but you can see it was done relatively quickly. There are details included, but the details are still fairly loose. Now, here we have a look at both the painting and the preliminary sketch side by side. So let's take a look at some of the things that Van Gogh decided to leave out or include in the painting that wasn't in the initial sketch. The first thing you'll notice here is that there is a tree that is very clearly evident in the painting here and conspicuously absent there in the sketch. Now, I do feel like the tree is influencing the composition. You'll notice that for now, the tree is missing, and again, I think that the inclusion of the tree leads to a stronger composition. Now, the next thing you'll notice is that the opening for the sky, the amount of space that the sky takes up in the sketch is much smaller than the amount of visible sky that is shown in the final painting. Now, obviously, the sky is important in this painting. It has that starry night quality to a certain degree with the way that Van Gogh handled the stars. And in the sketch, there's less picture plane space taken up by the sky, so the sky is not quite as important in the sketch. So obviously Van Gogh decided to make the sky a little bit more important in the final painting, and I do think that this amount of space up here does play a role in the overall composition. So you can see he just basically changed the shape of the building here to allow for more of the sky to take up more of the picture plane space. Now, obviously, another thing you'll notice is the amount of detail that's included in the sketch. Here we have information about windows. We can see there's ledges and so on. There's some details with signs and so on in the sketch, but in the final painting, a lot of this is missing. We still have some windows, but the details are definitely more muted. Now, another thing you'll notice here is that the people we have within the scene are a little bit larger in the sketch. Maybe Van Gogh was zoomed in a little bit closer in his mind as he was, taking down this visual information. But there's also some people that have made it from the sketch to the final painting, and some people who have been included in the painting that weren't in the sketch. Noticeably, we'll see that the tall figure here is in both paintings. The figures are arranged a little bit differently, but in a similar fashion. This guy made it into the final painting, it looks like, but we'll notice that the dark figure in the opening was not in the sketch, but was included in the painting. And I think this guy right here is pretty important in the success of the final composition. The top portion of the terrace is a little bit lower within the picture plane, and there's some other differences, obviously. If you look close at the sketch and the final painting, you'll see a lot of these differences, such as the simplified edge around the top of the terrace. For the most part, the rest of the compositional issues were hashed out in this preliminary sketching stage. Just one more thing here, and that's the horse and carriage. You can see that the horse and carriage is a little bit further down the road here in the sketch compared to where it ends up in the final painting. I think that there's a reason Van Gogh did that. Now, the reason why we started by pointing out the differences between the sketch and the final painting is because in your own works, I don't want you to feel like you are tied to your sketch. You can make changes throughout the process, of course, and make the drawing or painting that you're creating better, just like Van Gogh did. While he painted from observation, he did still stay true to his instincts and made artistic decisions along the way. This means that he wasn't tied to what he saw in reality. He was able to add or subtract at his own discretion, and that's something that we should all be doing as artists anyway as well. Now, composition, of course, refers to the way the elements within the scene are laid out, and it influences the way a viewer interacts with the piece. So Van Gogh was using composition to manipulate how you, as a viewer, interacted in this piece. Now, if we take a look at the painting for a second, just take note of where your eyes are led. Is there a specific place where your eye goes? For me, anyway, I'm drawn to this particular area within the composition. So I would consider this particular area to be the focal point. Now, Van Gogh has done several things here to ensure a strong focal point in this particular composition. The first thing he's done is he's used a high level of contrast. Now, contrast can deal with any type of difference. It can be difference in texture, difference in color, difference in value. In this particular case, we have difference or contrast in color and value. And whenever we have strong contrast in a particular location, it's naturally going to pull a viewer's eye to that location. Now, another reason why our eyes are pulled to that area is because of converging lines. Now, you might look at this and say, well, I don't really see any defined lines, but if we look close, maybe we can see some implied lines. First of all, there are some defined lines. We have these lines that are happening here with these little pieces coming off the wall. We have these directional lines that kind of happen because of perspective, and we can see these repeated throughout. And then we have lines that kind of imply like they continue on, again, due to perspective. Now, if we see all these lines, if we continue them out, we can kind of get an idea of where our eyes are being led here, either through implied lines or actual lines that are there on the surface. And again, all of these lines are working together to help pull our eye as a viewer to this area of focal point. Can you see that happening? Even the edge of the terrace here is pulling our eye down to that location as well. So not only do we have contrast in value and color, but we also have these lines that are helping to pull our eyes to these locations as well. Now, clearly, focal points can be positioned anywhere within the picture plane. It's completely up to you where you place them, but there are some areas that typically lead to more aesthetically successful compositions. There is a compositional construct called the rule of thirds. Now, the rule of thirds is based on the golden mean or golden proportion, which is a little bit more mathematically convoluted, But if we just remember the rule of thirds, that will help us out with our own composition. Now, basically, the rule of thirds is about dividing your canvas into thirds, obviously. Now, if we lay a grid over the top of this painting based on the rule of thirds, meaning that each section here, each line is drawn based on a third of the picture plane, we can see that there are some intersecting points that occur because of this. There's one right here, and here, and here, and here. Now, these points, these intersecting points, it's argued, are great places to put focal points. As you can see, this area right here lines up with our main focal point, meaning that this is an aesthetically successful position to put your focal point. And Van Gogh did this, either purposely or by happy accident. Now, most of us are familiar with the 7 elements of art. They are line, shape, form, color, value, texture, and space. Now, the elements of art, we can kind of think of those as ingredients. And Van Gogh has used all the elements of art in this particular painting here. But we also need to consider the principles of art. And I like to think of the principles of art as kind of being like the recipe. So we take the ingredients, and the way we arrange the ingredients leads to what we pull out of the oven. When in a piece of art, the elements are the ingredients: value, line, color, texture, and space, and so on. The way we arrange those things are the principles of art. So let's take a look at a couple of principles of art and how Van Gogh has used them in this particular composition. Now, balance is one of the principles of art, and when we think of balance, we typically think of visual balance. Now, every element that we include in a piece of artwork has a sense of visual weight associated with it. And if we have a composition that's a little too heavy on one side, we need to balance it out visually on the other side to make it feel balanced. Now, Van Gogh has done something really interesting in this painting dealing with balance. So firstly, we can see that there is a clear dividing line that happens here almost right through the middle of the painting. And we can see that this area here, right here, is really strong with yellow, and this area over here is really strong with blues. Now, if you're sharp, you know that yellow is a warm color and blue is a cool color. So we've got some color contrast, or actually color temperature contrast, between warm colors over here and cool colors over here. You can see that since it divides the painting in a certain way, we have some balance between cool colors and warm colors. But that's not all. We also have some contrast in value. Now, what is value? Value is the darkness or lightness of a color. It's how we understand the world around us. It's how we understand texture. It's how we understand the light source within the scene. Value is so incredibly important, it really needs to be its own separate entity in art. If we go ahead and take all of the color out of the painting and are left only with blacks and whites and a variety of grays, we can see something really interesting happening here. Remember when we just talked about the color temperature and the contrast in color temperature? Well, look at this contrast in value as well. Again, if we kind of break this down, here we can see that we've got darker values over here and lighter values over here. Again, this is creating balance in the composition. When we have visual weight on this side, it's balanced out on the other side by additional visual weight. This is making the composition, of course, balanced. Now, while we've taken the color out of the painting, let's look a little bit closer at some of the things that Van Gogh's done with value to make a stronger composition besides just using it to balance the piece. First of all, we can see that there's a full range of value in this particular piece, meaning we've got the darkest darks, and we can see those throughout the painting in all of the dark areas. Here's a dark area, here's a light area, and then we've got a variety of different grays in between. So that means that we have a full range of value. We're using all of the values on the value scale, the darkest darks and the lightest lights. Now, Van Gogh has also used value to create additional contrast and to pull a viewer's eye to different locations, which we kind of alluded to when we started talking about the composition and the focal point. You can see here in this area, we've got strong contrast between the different figures, and of course, that's going to pull our eye to that location. But remember that dark, shadowy figure? And remember how I said that it was not in the sketch, but it was in the painting? Well, here it is in the painting. And look at how strong this dark, shadowy figure is here. This contrast helps to pull our eye over to this left side of the picture plane, of course, in the area close to the focal point. Again, just enhancing that focal point and also adding some visual weight to the left side. Now, another principle of art that Van Gogh has used well in this painting is rhythm. Now, rhythm, when we think of rhythm, we typically think of things that we hear. So we might have a song that we listen to and we like the rhythm, we like the beat. Now, one of the key aspects of rhythm is repetition. For example, if I was playing a beat on the drums, I would play the bass drum maybe at the same point in each measure. I would hit the snare drum at the same point in the measure. Essentially, I would be repeating what I do in each measure. That repetition leads to rhythm. And when we're talking about visual art, we're talking about visual rhythm. And just like an audio rhythm, with visual rhythm, the key to creating that rhythm is repetition. Obviously, we have these cobblestones that are happening down there, and the way they're addressed is repeated. And this repetition, of course, creates visual rhythm. What's interesting here are the color relationships. He has these blue purples and these yellow oranges. And if you know anything about color theory, then you know that these blue purples and red oranges are directly across from each other in the color wheel, making them complementary colors. Complementary colors obviously provide the highest level of contrast. Now, there's more repetition that's happening here as well. We've got these tables that repeat off into the distance, and that, of course, is creating some rhythm. The repetition of the figures also helps as well. And this rhythm, of course, adds additional interest to the painting. In any painting or drawing that we create, we need to have variety in there so our painting is not boring. But we also need to make sure that our drawings and paintings are harmonious too. So there's a little bit of a balance that happens there between making sure that your painting or drawing has variety, but also is harmonious. Now, you remember that green tree that I pointed out wasn't in that sketch, but is now in the painting? Here it is. Now, you'll notice the tree is green, obviously, right? Well, look at all these blues that we have throughout the painting and all of these yellow oranges and red oranges, which we discussed are complements or very close to being complements. But we also have some greens in here as well, right? Well, we have these green shutters off in the distance. And then we have these areas where Van Gogh has used a little bit of blue to create some of the shadowed areas. But that blue, of course, mixed with some of the yellows, producing greens. We can see this on the wall here. We can see this in the window. We can see that in the windows over here on some of the figures, on the horse way off in the distance, on some of the chairs here. So green is subtly in this painting as well. Now, one of the ways that we can ensure some harmony in our paintings is if we use a color, we use it in other areas just instead of one area. So instead of using a color in one area, we use it in other areas within the painting as well and spread it out. And of course, that leads to harmony and unity. And you can see all these greens that are happening in the painting. And now the tree is in there too. So this is just another opportunity to add a little bit more green to make the painting feel a little bit more harmonious. And speaking of things that Van Gogh changed in the painting compared to the sketch, remember the horse and the carriage that was kind of a little bit off to the right in the picture plane? In the final painting, we can see that horse and carriage right here. Now, you'll notice that around the outside of the horse and carriage, I'll zoom in a little bit closer here, you can see that there is a kind of a bluish-green glow around the outer parts of the horse and carriage. Now, why do you think Van Gogh included that glow around the horse and carriage? Well, the answer should be pretty obvious, and that's so that you could actually see the horse and carriage, because there needed to be some contrast there in order for the horse and carriage to stand out. And Van Gogh did this brilliantly by adding a lighter blue around it, and that lighter blue makes sense with all the other elements within the scene as well. Now, I've talked a little bit about Van Gogh's use of complementary colors, and on the surface, it's pretty obvious that we've got these yellow oranges and we've got these blue purples that are happening throughout the scene, and blue purple and yellow orange would be considered complementary colors. But Van Gogh has also included some other subtle complementary relationships in the painting as well, and if you look close, you can see them. For example, right here at the bottom edge of the underside of the terrace, maybe this is a rug or something like that, we can see that there are some red oranges there, and there's also some greens that are happening there too. And red is complementary to green, obviously, so that produces some high contrast and helps those little areas to stand out a little bit more, and of course adds additional interest as well We can see that here in Van Gogh's choice of the railing here, or the decorative lamp post holders, whatever they are. They're contrasting nicely against the yellow greens that are behind it. We can also see this on the window pane over here. We've got these reds next to these yellow greens, and this is echoed in other areas as well throughout the painting. We've got some reds next to greens here as well. So Van Gogh definitely was cognizant of what colors he was using and those color relationships as well. And you know what? We should be as well when we create our own drawings and paintings. Now, obviously, another component that is contributing to the success of this painting is Van Gogh's brushwork. Van Gogh obviously is known for his creative use of applying the paint to the surface, his creative brushwork, and we can see this evident in this painting as well. And I'm just going to point out a few things about his brushwork here that we can, of course, borrow and apply to our own drawings and paintings if we wish. Whenever we make strokes with a pencil or a paintbrush, we need to think about the directional strokes that we make, because those directional strokes help to influence how a viewer perceives the subject that we're drawing or painting. For example, here on the side of the opening here, we can see that the brush strokes flow along the form of that particular plane in a vertical direction. Underneath the awning here, though, the brush strokes are flowing in this direction, again along the form of this particular section. Here in the tree, we can see the brushstrokes are clearly defined, again, flowing in a uniform direction. And we can see this on the buildings back here. Again, these strokes are vertical instead of horizontal. That helps to echo the form of the building. Now, Van Gogh's painting here is very well executed, as we've pointed out. Hopefully you see the reasons why, but I want to point out some imperfections here, particularly in the use of perspective, and it's just fine. It still works for the painting. Here we can see Van Gogh has used some perspective. Now, obviously, this perspective helps to create the illusion of space within the scene. There are some other things that are contributing to the illusion of space, namely overlapping, size, the positioning of elements within the picture plane, and so on. But perspective, specifically linear perspective, typically falls into one of three categories: 1-point perspective, 2-point perspective, or 3-point perspective. Now, when we deal with linear perspective, we typically determine where the horizon line is, and in this particular case, the horizon line is probably somewhere in this location. Now, the horizon line is the line that divides the sky from the ground, technically, but it could also be your line of sight. So if you looked up into the sky, your horizon line would technically change, but in this particular case, we're just going to refer to the horizon line as the line that divides the ground from the sky. Now, on this horizon line, a point is placed, and the type of perspective you're doing determines the number of points that you include. So let's just assume that this painting is in 1-point perspective, which probably most people would agree that's pretty accurate. So if we look at the lines of perspective, and these lines are used here to go off in space, and I'm just going to draw these lines here based on the buildings around them, you kind of get an idea of what direction these lines are going to, and kind of get an idea or a sense of where the vanishing point is. And the vanishing point would probably be somewhere right in this location or pretty close to it. Now, one thing I want you to notice here is that the Van Gogh's perspective is not perfect. These lines kind of go similar to where they need to be, or in a similar direction that they need to be, but they're definitely not perfect. There's some inconsistencies here, and the result is it makes the painting feel a little bit more handmade. It makes the painting feel a little bit more like a person was involved in its execution, and I like that. I think that adds character to the painting. My point is, don't get wrapped up too much in making everything perfect, because no drawing or painting is going to be perfect. You just try to do the best you can and allow your artistic voice to show through in everything you create. So there you go, guys. A quick look, a quick analysis of one of Van Gogh's more famous paintings, Café Terrace at Night. I hope you were able to pick up a couple of things here and there, and more specifically, or more importantly, I hope that you're going to be able to apply what you've learned in this critique to your own drawings and paintings. That's the whole purpose of critique. It doesn't have to be a critique of your art in order for you to benefit from it. We can learn from other artists, whether they're masters or artists that we know at our local art center. Thanks again for watching, and as always, I wish you all the very best in your artistic success.